Hello and welcome to Angular Air. I'd like to start today thanking some of our sponsors. First, our platinum sponsor, Auth0. Modern authentication can be hard, but Auth0 makes it easy. I use Auth0 and I love it, and a lot of people who use Angular also use Auth0, so definitely check it out. Find out about adding authentication to your Angular 1 or 2 app in under 10 minutes at auth0.com/Angular. And I'd also like to thank ThoughtRam, our friends at ThoughtRam, regular organized workshops, webinars, and even free training days near you. So find out more at thoughtram.io/training.html. All right, and on our panel today, we have Olivier Cohn.
Hi, guys.
And Josh Moot.
Hi.
Josh is a guest panelist for today from the Angular Connect team, and he uses Ionic, knows a little bit about it, so he was going to help us with our discussion talking about Ionic 2. This is the second week of 3 in a row that we're doing on different mobile-related frameworks with Angular 2, and I'm really excited about today's episode because I'm a huge Ionic fan. I've been using Ionic 2 for some of our stuff that's still in development, and I have like a gazillion questions. So this is going to be great. Let's meet our guests from the Ionic team, starting with Adam.
Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Bradley. I'm the lead developer on Ionic.
Hey, guys. I'm Tim Lancina. I work on tooling here at Ionic.
And then Brandy.
Hey, everyone. I'm Brandy Carney, and I'm also a developer working on Ionic.
And then finally, Mike.
What's up? I'm Mike. You probably talked to me before in the Slack channel forum. I'm the developer friend.
Short and sweet. I like it, Mike. All right. So Ionic 2 is in beta, and my first question is, how is it going?
It's going great. We've been putting a lot of work into it the last 9 months or so, and it's pretty exciting because just I feel like just in the last month it's really kind of solidified of the framework underneath. Like the Angular 2 side of things has stopped changing on us. You know, we finally have gotten made sense of it all, of what we want to do with Ionic 2, and it's great because we're getting so many users submitting ideas and issues that are fixing bug requests or issues. So it's actually going really well. Pretty excited bug requests. Pretty excited about it.
That's awesome. So can you give us some idea of some of the adoption rates so far in terms of how many people from both who have been using Ionic 1 have started to use Ionic 2, and then how many new people have started to use it?
Sure, yeah. So what's great is with Ionic 2, we're really using NPM like we should have been from the start. So with that, we're getting a lot of good stats. So our CLI has always been in NPM, and that still continues to see 4,000 to 5,000 downloads a day. And continuing to grow. And we just switched. What's kind of weird is last week, we kind of switched between using the Ionic Framework NPM module to Ionic Angular. So because of that, our numbers are a little weird, but normally we're seeing around 800 NPM downloads per day just in our beta, and even in alpha, it's quite a bit of interest in it. So it's actually been a lot of fun. So it's just starting to take off, and it really is kind of growing a lot. So we're really excited about it.
So what's been going good so far? What hasn't been going well?
What's been going well? Actually, so we made a lot of changes to kind of how the navigation worked between version 1 and version 2. And version 2 kind of has more of a push-pop concept, which is more native-like. And I was pretty hesitant at first, and that's why Angular 1 really had more of a URL-based structure. More web app, because we kind of web developers are using it, so it's more web HTML-y. But with Ionic 2 and using our own push pop navigation system, I've been really impressed, really amazed of seeing what people are actually doing with it. And so we've got all these hundreds of unit tests of what you can do with push pop. If something gets added and removed within a millisecond, it knows how to handle it. And so I've got all these tests, and I know it can do these things. But when I actually see what people are creating with it, and how they have nested tabs inside of a modal, inside of a side menu, they can just go crazy with this new structure. So I guess the coolest part that I've seen is what I'm seeing people do with the navigation and the new navigation.
Yeah, just a question on that because I love universal apps like running different contexts and that type of thing, and so I know that people do write Ionic apps that run on the web. So what's the story with using your built-in navigation on the web?
Yeah, so absolutely. So one thing I want to point out is that the push pop is not a router. It is merely the developer has full control of exactly how it's going to work. They can say, I want to push on this page, I want to pop 5 pages. It's completely up to them. After that happens, it then can update the URL of saying, okay, this is the state of the app at this moment. And so the difference between version 1 and version 2 is that version 1 used the URL to tell the app what to do. And so it's always like looking at the URL like, okay, you want this URL to happen, so that means I'm supposed to load up this structure. With version 2, it's kind of the opposite, where the developer says, I want this to exactly happen in this order, these views to be in the stack, and then after the fact, after the developer says, this is how it's supposed to be structured, it then updates the URL and says, okay, this is like our breadcrumb of the state of the app at the moment. So under the hood, a router isn't required whatsoever. But you can still add the router to then remember the state that you're at. And there's been a lot of changes in the Angular 2 router in the last month or so. So right now there's probably about 75% of it complete in Ionic 2. So simple navigation will work fine with URL updates. It's the more complex stuff of a tab within a tab. But that said, it's going to be just as easy. Actually, it's going to be much, much more easier than it was before, because now like kind of the app is updating itself what the URL structure is, and you're not having to reverse engineer of like parsing apart a string to make sense of what this is supposed to do. It's the developer has a lot more control. So,
have you considered using UI router version 2?
We are not using UI router. So so again, like the core of Ionic has its own navigation structure, which allows us to be have full control of like what happens between the views, because it's actually very complicated to know when a view is halfway through and the person hits the back button, what's it supposed to do. And that's where we got into a lot of issues with UI routers, because we kind of gave up control at that point of, all right, it's halfway done, or the user wants to have 3 pages behind this one and you hit the back button, those ones are supposed to load. Doing it through the URL first was the challenge. So yeah, so with our own, we're able to set that up and then use Angular 2's router. Really, we're just kind of using its parser of the URL and being able to update the URL side of things. But yeah, I'd say that's the biggest difference, and we're not using UI router at all in V2.
Okay.
Somewhat related, does Ionic allow for deep linking?
For deep linking, so you mean like if they had a certain URL that they wanted to go to and they wanted to load up the app?
Like on Android, you can, if you're using Android native, and I haven't checked into whether you can do this on Ionic or not, so maybe you can. But from a URL on the web, you can kind of redirect to a specific screen on the actual native mobile app.
I haven't personally proven it and used it, but it's absolutely possible. And it was that kind of cool. It's like if you had a certain URL, like you could come up with your own like /Jeff, right? It could populate this app to exactly how you wanted it. Where you're like, I want to be on tab 2, I want to be 3 pages in on tab 2, I want to load up this data. So like you can be very, very specific according to whatever crazy deep linking URL you provide.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'd like to go over a number of like cool things that you guys have been working on. I picked out like a couple things, but I'm sure there's gonna like maybe be other ones that have kind of come up along the way. Starting off with Ionic Creator. So this is something that you did create. I think it was like 6 months ago, 7 months, something like that. So maybe do you want to give us a overview of what Ionic Creator is and what it does?
Yeah, so Creator is basically taking everything that stuff that the company has done before with drag and drop interface builders, and pushing that forward and really building mobile apps using Ionic and driving everything underneath. Yeah, like you said, we put it out some time ago, but in recent months, it's gotten a lot of attention put towards it, and it's a million times better than the first initial release. It's actually exporting code that you would expect you as a developer to write. Things are properly separated out, so that way you're not getting just boilerplate HTML and kind of weird-looking controller files. You're actually getting everything properly structured.
Yeah, and the first version that you're probably familiar with was kind of like an experiment. Like we hacked it together, see if this would be a good idea. Quickly saw that a lot of people liked it, and like since those last 4 months, we actually, we've hired on a full-time developer that's dedicated to just improving Ionic Creator, and it's actually really starting to stabilize. And like Mike was saying, like the structure it provides is more natural to what the developer would want to see.
Yeah, I mean, I know even when it first came out, and it's gotten better over time, the thing that I've always found most useful with the Ionic Creator wasn't necessarily designing my screen exactly, but just, especially when you're starting to get into Ionic 2 and the APIs and such, instead of like looking it up and trying to figure out from the documentation what to use, if you do that and then just like look at the code, sometimes it's like a lot easier to then parse out and translate to what you're trying to do. At least for me, that's kind of how I found it, but I'm curious what you guys have seen, like who is actually using it, like what audience, is it mostly what I kind of just described, or are there other use cases as well?
So it's really targeting people who want to either prototype the app first, kind of figure out what direction do they want to go in. Do they want maybe a tabs layout? Maybe they want a side menus layout, or do they just want a single linear app? And then it's also targeted to like the more hardcore developers who don't want to spend time, getting all those simple structure, getting all the buttons on there. They can just prototype it, put static content in there, and then they can start hooking up all their services. And it's kind of going for both the beginners and for the more advanced at the same exact time.
So I'm curious whether you think at some point in the future you get to the level where somebody could, for simple apps at least, design it in Creator, publish it, potentially without even writing any code, like have like a little like mobile app. Like, do you think you'll ever get to that point?
Yeah, I'd love to get to that point. But I mean, let's be honest, there are certain things that people just want. I mean, actually, the roots of this company, before we had Ionic, we had Codica, which was a drag-and-drop interface builder for jQuery Mobile. And it worked well, it was very successful, but as us developers on the back end trying to build this out, developers always wanted more and more and more. And there's just certain things you can't put into a UI, into a drag-and-drop interface, because like people wanted Google Maps, so we added a Google Maps feature, but it only had one marker. But then people wanted a different type of markers. There's a certain line of like what you can provide them out of the box, and then like, okay, you got to start getting your hands dirty if you want to have a big app.
Oh, sure, yeah, for a legit app. I'm just thinking sometimes you just want to like prototype something or have something really simple that maybe one day.
Yeah, no, it is actually a good idea, and that's something that Max and Ben and I have talked about in the past of having a static server, making it easier for developers to whip it together, throw it up on the site, and there you have it. And what's also cool is with Ionic 2, and progressive web apps, it's gonna, all of this stuff is then gonna be like, we can kind of figure out all the service workers for them and the SSL that they'll need and get everything all ready. So like, sometimes people forget that Ionic isn't just a Cordova thing. It's actually just a website thing, a thing that runs in the browser. So we're also looking heavily into Ionic 2 on the browser too.
Yeah, can you talk more about that actually? Because maybe that doesn't get published as much. So what type of work are you guys doing in that field? I mean, with service workers, with everything else. Is that built in already, or that's kind of like on the future roadmap?
That's not a roadmap. So we haven't, there's still, like it won't work in Safari, so there's a lot of stuff that we have to experiment with yet. But it's absolutely something that's really cool. I mean, just in the last year, it's amazing the stuff that the browsers have started adding into what's possible. And it's really making it, the dream that jQuery Mobile had, 4 or 5 years ago was to run the app on a normal web page. I feel like it's finally coming possible that we can do things like that. And then as web workers is going to be a possibility. We're going to have multi-threaded JavaScript, running in an app. And what else? Then Igor Menares of the Google team has stated that the Hello World app should fit within 10 kilobytes payload. And so they're going to be able to get everything really tiny, small, get everything multi-threaded, get it onto the web. The work that you're doing with the server-side rendering, I mean, it's just amazing, like kind of the possibilities that we're just getting into what, not just Ionic, but what Angular can do and like what all web development can do.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I actually had this as like a section for later in the discussion, but I mean, I think that the possibilities for the web in the future, I feel like although people understand how powerful the web is, and we all are, a lot of people listening to the show are web developers, people continuously like underestimate, you know, how quickly things move, like how much things can change, and I think you're right that we're sort of on the verge of a whole set of major game-changing innovations that are about to,
Yeah,
everybody.
and I could easily go on a 2-hour rant about kind of web development and how it's seen as like, oh, it's just, well, you're a web developer. There's just one type of web developer, just like there's one type of car, one type of doctor, you know. So like, I don't think people realize that it's not just for blogs. You can actually, the web platform is extremely powerful, and the stuff that they've added into it just in the last couple of years, really, Ionic 2 and Angular 2 has kind of proven it. Just with these HTML tags, CSS, and JavaScript, you can really kind of build out some awesome apps.
Yeah, and I think you do see that, by the way, in a lot of other communities as well. If you guys watched the ReactConf videos and talks, they had a talk on someone who did something similar to the app shell using Service Worker, and I think it's very clear that everybody's kind of converging on this idea that it won't be long before we do have sort of like you're talking about, Adam, the same type of app type feel
right.
On the web.
And I'm not here to dig at Internet Explorer, but they really kind of hurt the web development movement by having IE6, IE8 locked in for so long. But now that those days are kind of getting past us and we have browsers that are self-updating, we're able to update this stuff very quickly.
That's awesome. All right, a couple other things I wanted to touch on for some of the stuff you guys are working on. So I just noticed when I was researching for the show notes here, or the show agenda for today, that you guys had a playground, which seemed pretty awesome. Did you guys want to talk a little bit about that?
Sorry, you were cutting out. I didn't hear what you said.
Sorry, I was asking about the Ionic Playground.
Oh, okay. So we have not gotten it ready to support Ionic 2 yet. We've really been focusing more on getting the API for Ionic 2 beta ready and better. But it's definitely one of the things that is on our roadmap that we want to add support for. Just recently, Tim actually created a code pen that works with Ionic 2. So right now we have that code pen to rely on for people to give us examples through. But it is something that we want to add to Playground. So.
Yeah, just to chime in quick, we also use Plunker a lot as well because it does the TypeScript translation in the browser. So the code pen was more proof of concept because a lot of our tooling around Ionic 1 for managing issues and stuff was built around CodePen, just so we could kind of make use of the existing infrastructure to see if it would work. So yeah, I'm sorry. And the challenge that we've had with kind of wanting to create out the playground a bit more is again like the being able to transpile stuff to ES5 when they write it in TypeScript or ES6. So that's where getting Plunker to work was huge. It sounds simple, but it was pretty cool to get that working. And then Playground, we really like to push that forward to make it very easy. Here's an example, fork this, and then you can download it, the examples that we have. So we'd like to put all of our demos on there and use Playground for that.
What do you think? Go ahead.
Do you think that it could be something that you open source? Because I know a lot of libraries developers who could use that on their own documentation.
Open sourcing it?
The fact that you can write your code in the web page and just get the example working on the side.
Yeah, I think we definitely would be up for that. Is Playground open source or not?
No.
Yeah.
No, it's private.
Yeah. But yeah, we definitely be open for that because that is like a challenge. And I think what are some of the other ones that are pulling it off? Is it JS something, JS spin?
Yes, next spin.
Yeah, some of them are pulling it off with the, behind the scenes translation.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem, I think, the biggest issue that Ionic or Angular 2 developers have are those darn parameter decorators, because Babel doesn't like them and TypeScript needs to have them. And that's something we've been kind of dealing with over the last couple of months of trying to get that working. But I believe it's now in stage something or another. So it should be accepted, or hopefully it's added into Babel soon. But with TypeScript, it works great. So.
Well, yeah, so this touches on. Do we have a? Okay, sorry about that. So this touches on one thing I'd really be interested in hearing your guys' thoughts on. As far as the build process. With it's awesome all this new stuff that we're working on, Ionic 2, Angular 2, everything, but there is a cost that which comes in terms of like the transpilation, the more complicated build process. And I know you guys definitely think about this a lot because one of your goals is to make things easy, right? To make web development easy and to sort of take that onus off of the developer and kind of build it into the tooling. So could you talk a little bit about what you've done with Ionic 2 to try to mitigate some of that complexity?
Yeah, definitely. I think what we're seeing with all of the kind of added build steps and in some cases added complexity is you can do so much more stuff. And so what we've really tried to do is enable you to take advantage of all the cool module dependency management stuff that you can do in the transpilation and getting all the benefits of writing clean future JavaScript while still kind of making the whole process of setting up the tooling and wiring everything up as simple as possible. So one thing that we've really done over the past months is like kind of just rigorously dog-fooded our own setup, tested out all the various technologies that are out there. Because what we're really seeing is there's no clear winner at this point. And I think what we wanted was to say, okay, this is the right choice or this is the right choice so that we can tell our users, hey, this is the way to go. And it really, when you get that kind of fragmentation of available options, you have like this problem of choice that then becomes an issue for new users. You want to still expose it without overwhelming people. And so one recent change that we made was switching off using Webpack as the default bundler in favor of Browserify. And I'm not super duper familiar with Browserify. It's been around probably the longest of all the bundlers. I use Webpack all the time. But what we found is that the bottleneck for kind of new users isn't really build speed. It's looking things up. It's the stuff they don't know. So when you are getting started with an Ionic project, keeping in mind that our goal is to make app development as simple and easy as possible, Browserify kind of much more aligned with those values. And the way our build is going to be set up soon, if you want to use Webpack, it's going to be as simple as just plugging it in and swapping out Browserify. Yeah,
so we're not saying no Webpack, it's not going to work with Webpack. It's absolutely like we want to be able to support anything that you want to. I mean, we just provide a library of JavaScript. You can use it however you want. But then like our CLI and how you get started provides kind of the base defaults of like, this is what we think is like the best way to get going. And I think like you read a lot about JavaScript fatigue and all that. I think the huge source of it is from the millions of options and the millions of blogs of people saying like, this is the best one, oh, this is the best one. And I'm all about that. Like, feel free to read those and make your own choice. But the hard part is configuring it from all these blogs and configuring it from some version that was a year-old blog. So when we provide that, the setup for you, and you can look at it like, oh, line 5 changes the source file to here. That's kind of the hard part of figuring it out and getting it to work on the first build is kind of done for you, and then you can go in and tweak the values after that.
Yeah, I have to say that by far one of the biggest strengths of Ionic that I found is just being able to build something quickly, like get something up and running, having the tooling in place for you guys to take a lot of that away from the developer, and a lot of the development iterations and workflow are just really, really good in Ionic. So that's definitely something that is a strength of what you guys have been able to accomplish.
Well, thanks. I mean, we do.
We agonize over this stuff, and we're always looking for feedback because there's a lot of moving parts, and we're trying to smooth it all out as best we can.
And with Ionic 1, this was all pretty simple because it's still just like, well, you can concatenate them all into one big file and things just work. And the CLI also made things a lot easier, like setting up SAS for you. But now it's amazing how much the world has changed in 2 years of how like modularized everything is. So we're kind of having to rethink like the roles of the CLI and kind of breaking apart and using NPM correctly. And then like Tim was saying, really dog food in it. And we've been getting a lot of feedback from the users, which has been great. Of just like, why do you do it this way? And like, oh, and we're like, oh, I didn't realize this was a better way. So it's awesome to have so many people involved already with it. Yeah.
One thing I want to quickly mention, I forgot to mention at the top of the show, if you do have questions, if you're watching live, and we do have a lot of people actually watching live right now, and you have questions for anyone on the Ionic team, you can tweet with the hashtag NGAIR, NGAIR, and we will ask them near the top of the hour. So jumping to another thing that you guys have, you guys have been really prolific this past year. It's crazy. And I actually hadn't seen this until I started looking around for the show again, is the Ionic Market. So can you tell me a little bit about the Ionic Market and what you're trying to do there?
So the Ionic Market is pretty much just a marketplace where you can go online. It's market.ionic.io, in case anybody doesn't know. And you can go up there and you can submit themes, starters, plugins for your Ionic apps, and other developers can go on the marketplace and they can search through the themes and starters and such. And some of them will be free, some of them will cost money, but you can pay for any of them that you want. And right now, I don't believe it supports Ionic 2, but I know that we're planning on adding the 2.0 as a version that you can upload. So that's pretty much the marketplace.
So how many plugins are there? Do you call them plugins that are, or what's the term we use for what's on the marketplace?
I think they're templates.
Yeah, I don't know how much. We should have gotten that number. But like one thing I do want to like point out is like the market itself is not something that like we plan to get rich from. It was never the intention that is like something that we get profits from. It was more for enabling developers to quickly get set up and to also like provide a way for Ionic developers to make an income. So we don't take any cut from what goes on there, and a lot of the links also point to different websites that sell themes and packages and stuff. So really all it's there for is just making it easier for Ionic developers to get started, especially if you saw something that was like, oh, this is a great conference app that I've seen someone else build. If I spend $5 on it, I just save myself a couple weeks. And you also have a well-built app that you can just start tweaking there. So it's not about us making money, because we're not making any money off of it. It's about letting developers really get started quickly, and also to themselves profit from building their own Ionic themes to sell.
Do you know if a lot of people use it?
Do a lot of people use it? Right now we have about 70,000 sessions every month.
Nice.
And we've received a lot of good feedback on it.
Very cool. Okay, so Ionic View. I haven't actually had a chance to use this yet, but I was going to start looking to it. Like, is it similar to TestFlight, or how does it like differ from TestFlight? That's what I gathered is what it is sort of like.
Yeah, so I actually have not personally used TestFlight, so we're in the opposite situation. But the impression I got from TestFlight was that it was iOS only, and it was limited to like a specific group of testers. So kind of similar motivation, also works on Android. Basically allows you to upload any code of any project you're working on, and then it's immediately available to anyone who has the View app that you have shared your project with. So we really see two kind of groups of people using it. People who are developing an app, maybe doing consulting work or something, and they have clients who want to keep up to date with the changes that are being made. And so then you can push those changes instantly to your clients. And then also people who maybe want to build for iOS but don't have a Mac, but they do have an iPhone. And so then it allows you to kind of target, deploy targets that wouldn't otherwise be available. And so yeah, we've seen a lot of, it's pretty popular, and I'm happy to say we'll be giving it some more love pretty soon.
Do you plan on supporting Windows Phone as well?
That's an executive question.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, Randy's smiling over there because just in Ionic 2 Beta 3 just landed with Windows support. So it's actually pretty awesome. And it's been a highly requested feature that was kind of a challenge to pull off with the state of Windows Phone and the era that Ionic 1 was out, because Windows Phone 8 was pretty bad, and a lot of the CSS didn't work. So and knowing like the numbers that Windows Phone had is always a challenge to say that yes, we're going to dedicate months of our time to try to get this to work. But since Edge has hit Windows Phone's platform, and the new structure that we have our CSS laid out with Ionic 2, we were able to, what was it, Randy? 3-4 days, you added the entire Windows Phone support?
Yeah, pretty much 3 days.
Yeah, so I think that's like a testament to both Brandy and her skills, but also like just how the structure of the new Ionic 2 is set up, where it's not, we started with iOS 6 and then we added, oh, let's change it around a little bit, make it look like iOS 7. Oh, geez, there's this new thing called Material Design. Let's kind of change it around a little bit more, make it look like Material Design. Like, oh, now people want to have Windows Phone. So from that lessons learned of how we structured V1 and how now V2 is structured, we could add in 50 platforms that all have a different design. And actually, that's another cool thing about, back to the marketplace, is that other people can add their own themes and their own colors and layouts and modes. So it's kind of a pretty cool structure that we can pull off now.
With that, is it all SAS-based, or are you using like different styling mechanisms, or is it kind of more open than it was in Ionic 1?
It's still entirely in SAS right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's the different options that we had 2-3 years ago. A lot of people were on our case of like, you got to use less and not SAS, but you kind of had to pick one, because in my opinion, like if both of them were identical, but we saw that SAS was like more widely used and it had the C bindings and it was faster compiling, so we went with SAS. It wasn't that we didn't like less; it's just that that's the one we picked. And because there's so many Ionic users that are familiar with SAS and they like it, we kind of stuck with it. And I personally love SAS too. I mean, I think it works great. And there's the newer one that's post CSS. Looked into that quite a bit. Looks really, really cool, but I didn't see any immediate benefits of making the entire Ionic user base switch over to it, because it was like the comparison of less to SAS. It's like, all right, there's one minor difference here, but it wasn't. I don't think switching everyone over to that just for the sake of like it's newer than SAS. I just don't see the benefits in it. So that's why we kind of stuck with SAS.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think the one thing, and this is just our own personal preference, but it's one of these like things that if you guys happen to go down this path, I'd be over the moon, I guess. Is the full JS styling. So it's sort of, there's a couple people are experimenting with this now. It's not necessarily ready for prime time, I don't think. There's a number of things, like certain things that are going into the CSS standards that will help with media queries and some other like pseudo classes. But if one day we could have a style framework that's just pure JS and it works like extremely well, like that, I think would be the ultimate. Like not having to deal with any of the other CSS preprocessors. And
what I think is cool about V2 is that all of this is highly possible. Like every single SAS file is modularized out. That it could be, I think you're describing now, was it CSS modules? Was this kind of the project that does a lot?
That's one of them. Yeah.
Yep. I did a lot of research into that and read up on it, like start toying around with it, and kind of what you alluded to is like it's still kind of experimental. And it does do some cool things. I don't want to knock it at all. I think it's really cool, a really great idea. Scoping CSS down to one thing is a really cool idea. But the mental overhead of what people are familiar with and how SAS already works and how easy it is for just a designer who knows Photoshop and CSS, how easy it is for them to just go in and change the font size. It all just kind of makes sense to them to what they're already familiar with. So I didn't want to introduce this whole new world of experimental features because, you know, let's be honest, everyone's got an app to create. You know, we're not. You can use these experimental features on the weekends, but people have, you know, they have deadlines, and so that's why, you know, Ionic is more focused on that.
Definitely. All right. One thing we didn't talk about with as far as features or stuff that not features, but different things that you guys are working on is the code push-like service that I think I forget whether I saw whether that is available yet. Last time I think we talked, it was something that was still kind of in the works. So is that something that is available now? How does it work? You know, if not, when do you think it will be available?
Yeah, that's a good question. That is from our kind of suite of services that we're offering to help and speed up app development. As of right now, I believe it is fully working. It's in a working state. There's just a plugin you include to do kind of the hot code push mechanism, very similar to, you know, the other ones that you're familiar with, that bypasses the App Store wait time. And yeah, I believe the services came out, and there was kind of the initial testing version, like, okay, let's see how this works out. And as far as I know, it's all stable and working great.
So, I mean, one thing I've never, I guess, understood, and maybe you guys have a better insight into this, is, you know, why doesn't Apple like shut something like this down? Like, it seems like they allow. They're so stringent about their guidelines for when you make updates, right? Like the approval process and stuff like that, which is the reason why things like this feature is so awesome, like being able to get stuff out there quickly. But sort of, I'm always wondering why they don't allow it. Will they someday, like, just kind of shut it off?
That's a great question. And along with, like, your line of thinking, you know, they're very stringent on adhering to the style guidelines and stuff. It seems kind of counterintuitive. But as far as I'm aware, they have explicitly said that it is allowed, and, you know, Apple is always allowed to lock the gates at any point because they're Apple. But I think at this point, the cat is out of the bag, and I think if they were to at this point take it away, there's just way too much infrastructure of apps based on this at this point in time. That they've come out and said explicitly, hey, this is allowed by our terms of service, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon.
Okay, cool. Now, one thing I saw, I was looking at the roadmap document that Brandy had tweeted out, I think it was earlier this morning or yesterday. And one thing I hadn't noticed before that I'm very interested to hear about is this Agnosticism Initiative. Am I saying that right? Agnosticism? Can you guys tell us a little bit about that?
What I want to go look. What did we write?
The React bindings, Angular 1 bindings, you know, all of that stuff.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we want to make sure that people can build apps quickly, that they can, you know, get their projects completed. Angular has always been a way to do that, and that's what many people are familiar with. But it's, you know, I'm not saying that we're abandoning Angular whatsoever, because we're not. I love Angular, and we use it in everything we use. But we don't want to lock ourselves into just one thing. So it's always something that we're exploring. That, like, the core of Angular, or I'm sorry, the core of how Ionic works does not have to be tied to just one type of framework. And so it's always something that we're looking into. And there's, you know, no promises. Like, this isn't something that we've even started, but it's something that we don't want to say that we're going to ignore either. We're always keeping an eye on the React community. React is really awesome. Like, we've been built some projects with it. It's a really cool framework, but we've kind of started with Angular first, is how it was. And even if you look at the history of the version 1 Ionic, we had folders for jQuery, Angular, and Ember were the different things that we're going to build out. And we started with Angular, and that was the one that immediately took off. That was the one that everyone wanted to use. And so as hard of a work as it is to build, you know, a framework, we're just like, all right, let's just go all in on Angular, and that's kind of what it goes to. So Well, I guess that what I'm really getting at is that we're Ionic and we build a mobile framework. We're not trying to tie ourselves to one specific way of doing things. However, the current version uses the amazingly blazing fast framework of Angular 2, the latest and greatest that has just like kind of the best standards-based JavaScript. So we absolutely love it. So that's kind of the one we're using that we'll continue to use. But we're not going to just say like that's the only thing we're going to do ever.
Traitor.
Right. Someone has said.
Yeah. Now, in the list, though, it listed on the document Angular 1 bindings. So does that mean basically the Angular 2 framework, but you would use, or Ionic 2 framework, would you use Angular 1 bindings? Is that what you were thinking about?
Yeah, that's also the same thing along the lines. Is like if we were able to pull that off again, like Ionic 2, is just a bunch of functions, right? Like we can wire them up to anything. So that was something we were investigating. But I will say, I'm not too optimistic on that being able to work without a couple years of development, which in a couple years you might as well just move over to not wait on me to complete that or us to complete that, but to go to Angular 2. So again, that's something that we're researching, but there's again no promises that that's something that we're going to like be able to pull off.
That'd almost be like a V1 refactor in a way.
Yeah, like I mean, at that point, if you have to rewrite all of your JavaScript, but still use Angular 1, but get all the new features of Ionic 2, but still be limited by Angular 1's performance. So it's like, if you're rewriting everything, I would probably recommend you to just go with Ionic 2, with Angular 2.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, and so what would you say is the sweet spot for Ionic apps? I know this is kind of a little bit evolved over the years, but do you think that basically, how do you pitch it to other people these days? Like, are you basically saying that anybody and everybody should be using Ionic for like all use cases, or are there a certain set of use cases that you guys feel are the ideal ones that fit in well with what you are working on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's definitely times you would and would not use Ionic. So let's say that you are YouTube and you're building your native application for iOS. If you were the CTO of YouTube, I would probably say you should use native. Actually, I would tell you to use native. Same thing for if you're building Angry Birds, a 3D game, a racing game. You're building like you're one of the top 10 apps in the App Store, Play Store, Facebook. All those things. That's absolutely a native app thing. But then for the rest of us, the people who have business applications, internal sales applications, enterprise stuff that businesses are actually using on a day-to-day purpose or day-to-day, that's where Ionic really shines. And I think that what I love about Ionic and why it's shaped the way it is that it really allows companies to kind of reuse their existing skills. Because most companies have in-house web developers and web designers. They don't have iOS developers and Android developers and the skill sets to be able to do both of them at the same time, and even Windows. So to say, like, well, I see you made that blog, could you also make an Ionic app? We're now enabling all these people that weren't able to do it before that they now can. So that's kind of the sweet spot that we really like. And back to kind of the enterprise thing, that's where we see a majority of our apps being built is kind of the enterprise crowd for their internal apps and stuff that they want to put together quickly and that they can do in-house without having to hire out, multiple contractors for months at a time.
So last week we had NativeScript, and I promised that we would ask the same question that we asked them. How do you compare with NativeScript, and what are your strengths or weaknesses compared to them?
Yeah, NativeScript is a really cool project. I mean, it's, but I think it kind of, back to kind of my points about like the web development side of things. You can have someone who's really comfortable with Photoshop and CSS, inspect the element, and change the color of the CSS really quickly. You can have designers easily contribute to the app development. You can have in-house developers, whereas kind of these other abstractions that are out there, they kind of require just core developers to be able to build out these apps, which is absolutely fine. I don't want to knock native script whatsoever, or React Native. I think they're both great projects, but I think they're more linked, more on the side of native developers, where it requires a lot of skill set in code development. Whereas with Ionic, we're able to reuse all the stuff you already know. And like one of the best examples is like Ionic. We don't really provide a way to debug our apps because we have this thing called Chrome and Safari Web Tools. Like everything's kind of built for us. Like I can ask any web developer, how do you inspect an element and see what the color is? And I can ask them, how do you do that in Ionic? They already know. Whereas I ask them, well, how do you do that in native script? Like they would have to research that quick and explain that to you. So it's not a dig against the other frameworks. It's just that there's more people that are familiar with web development than there are with kind of these abstractions. And another thing I'd like to point out is how these ideas of writing it once in JavaScript and then it kind of like abstracts it to these different platforms. That's not exactly a new idea. That's something that they've been doing long before Ionic was even created. There's Titanium, Steroids, or some of the other ones. Xamarin has been doing this for a long, long time. So these are like kind of frameworks that have existed for a long time. The last two are kind of just the most recent ones. That was, again, well before Ionic existed, and I think our adoption and how people have seen Ionic has kind of shown like its value in making it easy for web developers.
We actually have two. Oh, you were going to say something?
Yeah, just also one huge point for Ionic, I think, is that you can have a website with Ionic, and people don't have to install the application. So.
Yeah, exactly, and like we were talking about earlier about progressive web apps. That's something we really want to tackle. Is like if you want to have on the website, you want to have it server side rendered, you want to have it inside of a Cordova app, Windows Phone, Android, iOS, you name it. Like Ionic can do all that, and it's the exact same code base. And we really haven't talked too much about the themes and how we have the sass colors, but the JavaScript itself is completely dumb about design. It doesn't know anything. It's just core logic of how things happen. You can go in there and get crazy about like what theme you want just by changing a couple of lines of code. Like you can have the entire dark theme instead of a light theme by changing 2 lines of code. So there's just a lot of power in being able to use the web. That again works great for a lot of developers, and we're really proud of how it works. And that's also said, like in the last year, since these other 2 frameworks have come out, if you look at our NPM stats, we've continued to grow. So it really, I think there's a little bit of overlap of our development and theirs. Like there are some developers that have to make a decision which one they should use, but big picture, I think that there's not a large overlap of web developers wanting to use these other kind of abstractions over like something that they're familiar with.
I mean, one thing that I've come to the conclusion on with this, so I've been trying out essentially all 3 of the major sort of things were these 3 weeks that we're talking about: native script, Ionic, and React Native. And one thing that I've come to the conclusion of is that most developers should start off, like especially Angular developers, trying to use Ionic first, if nothing else. Even if later on there's some reason, in particular the app that you're building, that makes you move to, one of the other options, it is much easier to get started, and it actually fits more use cases than probably people think. Especially because most of the time people are building business apps, like you mentioned, Adam. So yeah. I think that's definitely all true.
And also, like, all the comparisons have been made. I mean, I love the comparison because it really shows that like the value of Ionic, because to compare it against Ionic, I think is a compliment. But they're also comparing it to V1, so I can't wait to see a lot of the blogs that are coming out of comparing it to V2. And we made major performance improvements just in the last month, and I've got many more. We've all got many more to add on to in the next month. Angular is going to be cutting out a lot of code to make their startup time faster, file size a lot smaller. So if you compare it to what we have in our 2.0 branch right now, it's blazing faster than 1.0. I can't wait to show you what we have like this summer of how much faster it's going to be, and then to have those comparisons made of the Springs version versus native. It's like I just can't wait to welcome it, because it really is like a pretty awesome framework.
So we do have a couple Twitter questions. One of them, there are two of them actually fit in really well with what we're talking about right now. First from Larry King, who's asking what user experience shortcomings are the most common within hybrid apps, and what is Ionic doing to close these gaps? And since we sort of started to mention that at a high level with performance, maybe, I'd be interested in like some of the specifics for like, I know the common stuff that I'm aware of is like long lists, for example, like scrolling with long lists, and maybe some other stuff. So what are some specifics around that, or what you guys have changed to make things faster?
Yeah, so that's a great one, like, because there are a lot of like things that developers unknowingly do to slow down the apps. Like you pointed out, list is probably the biggest one, and we've kind of got three ways around that. You got the refresher that would only load what you have. You pull down the refresh, and it's going to load only kind of new data at a time. You've got infinite scroll that it loads, let's say, 50 at a time. You can scroll down to the bottom, so like Twitter would do the infinite scroll, and then it can kind of load them at a time. And then what hasn't landed but should land in beta 4 is the virtual scroll, where you could have, and what we called collection repeat in Angular 1. And actually, the performance improvements we've been able to add to this version, because we're using native scrolling instead of JavaScript scrolling, is pretty awesome. I mean, this is the part where people compare, like, look at Ionic compared to native lists. This is the one I'm really looking forward to seeing the comparisons, because with native scrolling, the modern phones that we have today, and how we're able to update the DOM, like, I guess we've also learned a lot about how the DOM works, of when to read and write. It's very, very smart about, like, very conscious of when to read and write the DOM. So like you said, we're doing a lot of these things to make lists a lot faster for them. Other stuff that includes would be like how kind of page transitions work. You could have 10 different pages loaded up. The last page is going to be viewable. The second to last page is also going to still be in the DOM. It's sitting there ready to go, so that when you hit the back button, it's immediately doesn't have to re-render it, doesn't have to bring it back forward. It's just like it's sitting there ready to go, animates back in, and then it queues up the one before it. So there's a lot of stuff happening under the hood to allow these things, these performance improvements to happen. To include also our animations of how we're using under the hood, we're using the will change property, because we know exactly which elements we're going to change. We get them all spun up, we get the browser ready to animate things out. And that's also, like, you test out Ionic 2, the performance of the transitions, and it's looking pretty good. Like, I'm really, really proud with how it's turning out. To include having a completely different interaction for Windows Phone and Material Design, and how iOS does their thing. So, and allowing users to go in and customize that. So, I'd say, yeah, we do a lot of things to make sure that you don't shoot yourself in the foot and provide us too much data, or be able to render too many pages. But then also having flags to allow people to tell us where to go.
I guess the other major thing is stuff within Angular 2 itself. So, if you do run into things, being able to use something like the change detection strategy for on push, so that it only updates the specific pieces of the change, that probably makes a big difference from an Angular 1, like Ionic 1 app as well. Yeah,
on that point, so we do a lot of, we're also very conscious about what happens in the zone and what happens outside the zone, because there's lots of touch events, scroll events. There's lots of different types of asynchronous events that can happen. And for people newer to Angular 2, there's a thing called ng zone that then kind of like, it's kind of like the new $apply, where it kind of figures it out for you. It realizes that something happened. The browser did something asynchronously. Let's update the whole app to see if there's any changes. But there's a lot of those times that doesn't need to happen at all. And within Ionic, we're aware of, like, all right, this touch move does not need to cause the entire change detection. So there's a lot of things we're doing there too to not constantly reload your app, or like redo change detection of your entire app.
That's awesome. Last question on Twitter is from Leith Wells, who I don't know whether he asked this cheekily or what, but yes, can we hear the milestones for Ionic Native? Which it sounds like is not a thing, but...
Oh yeah, milestones for Ionic Native. Okay, one big one that I can think of off the bat is to get all of the wrappers for the Cordova core plugins into Ionic Native. So if anyone's familiar with the ng Cordova project for version 1, it kind of provided these nice Angular wrappers around Cordova plugins. Ionic Native has kind of similar goals. And that actually ties into the first question from Twitter. You know, what are some of the issues that people encounter during hybrid development? One of the other things that we want to really increase or improve the story for is plugins, and Ionic kind of has that. Ionic Native is kind of tackling that same issue. So milestones would just be plugins, plugins, and plugins. We're really encouraging community contributions. Just merged in a bunch of pull requests the other day. It's pretty easy to contribute to because it's just a thin wrapper over the plugins. And then, yeah, just trying to make it so that the docs are as clear as possible, and we support as much functionality.
Historically, that's always been the issue. Is, you know, we started out with Ionic of like, here, we built this great framework, start using it, and people are like, okay, yeah, but now I want to use Bluetooth. What do we do? And we're just kind of looking at each other like, oh yeah, we got to figure that out too. So we were kind of late in the game of making it easy for developers to figure that stuff out. But with Ionic 2, you know, so we did come up with NG Cordova to kind of solve the problem. But with Ionic 2, we definitely are making it a lot easier, especially in this new NPM modularized world of how you would include Cordova plugins easily into Ionic, and really not even just Ionic, into any project. We don't. This isn't just an Ionic only thing. So
yeah, it works with any Cordova thing, but it just gives you kind of several nice side effects. Like it'll warn you in the console and not throw any errors if you don't have the plugin installed, or you know, the workflow between the browser locally and on an actual device when you're trying to use plugins and test against them. You know, there were some challenges there, and Ionic Native kind of tries to smooth that over. So, you know, say you forgot to install the plugin or something and your app is breaking, instead of crashing everything, it just kind of gives you a nice message and some straightforward diagnostics.
And another thing about the word Ionic Native, it's not necessarily mean native phone develop. It's more like it can also mean the native browser. So like if you build out your app to have like storage that you want to use, if you're on the web, it's going to use the appropriate storage that's available on the web. If you're on Cordova, iOS, it's going to be able to use what's available on iOS. So it's kind of like smoothened over that you can code once. Like you write, get me this, you know, key, and let me do something with this data. Under the hood, it's going to say like, oh, I'm on a browser, so let's use local storage. Let's use whatever is available, IndexedDB. So that's also kind of the point behind Ionic Native, is to like access the native features. So what's the other one, like geolocation, things like that, stuff that's available everywhere.
Yeah, so it'll make use of the browser APIs if they're there, and if not, you know, fall back to whatever nice formatted message. The other nice thing is TypeScript definitions. So all you do is you import from the module, and then boom, you got autocomplete, everything, all the IDE support, which is also very nice.
If you were to create one of those Microsoft, I think it's ACE, right? Microsoft ACE plugins, would that be something through Ionic Native as well?
That is a good question. I think it's more of a plugin thing, although, yeah, we're really impressed with ACE, and it's something we'd have to take a look at as well. You know, maybe there's a component section to the Ionic Native project where you would just include those components as well.
Well, so maybe it seems like from what you guys are saying here with definitely Ionic Native, and maybe if there's a future thing with Microsoft ACE, which is another way of building plugins to like interact with native functionality, that for apps that might be, you know, 80%, 90% business apps that just need basic functionality, but then you need like one or two like native features. Like this would be the thing that closes that gap, right?
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then like making it easier, because I think right now the existing Cordova landscape was a kind of a challenge to get a good plugin, understand how to import it correctly. But now with this new world of modules and ES6 or modules and NPM, kind of like taking it to the next level, making it easy for them to import it into their new structure.
Yeah, and also centralized documentation. So instead of, you know, having to chase down all of the areas, like we make sure the docs make sense for every plugin. It's like, I just want to use Bluetooth. I just need to know how to do that. Here, it's on the Ionic website. Here's how you use Bluetooth.
So we are at the top of the hour. It's been an awesome conversation. Is there something that we may have missed about Angular or Ionic 2 that you guys wanted to make sure we go
over? No, I mean, I could easily go on for another couple hours, but like to sum it up, yeah, I mean, it's something that we're really, really proud of, and I think we've in this month we've kind of hit the point of like, please start testing out, please start using it. We know that there's already a lot of there's some apps that have hit the Play Store and App Store that they're using. We have a lot of internal customers that are building it, or a lot of enterprise users that are using it internally. So it's great to see it starting to get really adopted, and we're going to like to start slowly transitioning people over to the Ionic 2 world over this next year.
Awesome. All right, let's get to our tips and picks. Just a quick note before we do that, next week on Tuesday, I think it's the 15th, we are, or Monday the 14th, that's right, we did change the date for it, but it's going to be actually on Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern. We're talking to Mark Lavel, who has championed using React Native within Angular 2. So that should be a very interesting conversation to see how we kind of mesh these two disparate worlds. So we're looking forward to that. And then the week after that, Tuesday, March 22nd, we're talking to Julie Ralph about Angular 2 testing with Protractor, Karma, all that type of stuff. So definitely tune in for both of those. All right, let's get to our picks, starting off with Olivier.
Yeah, so I have 3 picks this week. The first one is an article on Wrangle.io, which is upgrading your application to Angular 2 with ng upgrade. And it's a really complete guide if you want to start working on your application with Angular 2. I have, yes, so I have a project that I just did this weekend, and it's an universal Windows app, and I made a starter if you want to try Angular 2 with Windows Universal Apps, which should build on Windows 10, Windows Phone, Xbox, and Surface. It only works on Windows 10 for now because Angular 2 doesn't work on Edge, but still. And Angular 2 just released the milestone for Angular 2 release candidates, so go check this out. The final version should be coming soon, I hope. That's all.
Yeah, there's actually a countdown site that is tracking the estimated time when the release candidate will be there. I forgot what it said. I'll put a link in the show notes for that. All right, Josh.
Hi, thanks very much for having me on. I'm sorry I keep crashing out during the show. I just wanted to say that so Angular Connect is coming again the end of this year, in September, and we've just announced our workshop. So if you're interested in the Ionic stuff that we've been talking about, there's actually going to be an Ionic workshop with Sani Yusuf called Building Mobile Apps with Ionic 2. So go to www.angularconnect.com and have a look there, because spaces are limited. Thanks very much.
Cool. I just have one pick for this week, and it's going to sound like a troll, but it's not. It's actually React Native Radio podcast, episode 6. They went over React Native versus hybrid, and it was funny because I listened sort of expecting them to just like rip on Angular and Ionic and everything else with the ecosystem like the whole time, which they did a little bit. But I was actually surprised by they gave tons of love for Ionic. Like it was actually pretty amazing that just through the whole show, they had the guys that do Touchstone, which is an Ionic-like framework on the React side, and the creator of that framework. And he just talked about how much like Ionic inspired him, and they went into like a lot of the use cases and were pretty even-handed with like where Ionic shines and such. I mean, they did get a little bit into Angular, of course, but I did think it was pretty interesting to hear guys that are like React Native fanboys still promoting Ionic. So I'll post the link to that.
Cool.
Adam and Tim, why don't you guys go?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick plug for Ionic Native, and that if anyone is, what is that?
Plug.
Yeah. No, just if anyone is interested or has plugins that they want to see supported, it's pretty simple to add plugins that you're interested in, and we're really encouraging like the community to step in. So it's an easy first PR for people looking to get into open source.
Cool. What about you, Adam?
Yeah, actually, I don't have anything too much different than what I've been talking about for the last hour. It's like, we absolutely love the Ionic community. It's been great. Like, we've got a lot of PRs been submitted that we've been merging, and a lot of issues that have been created. People helping us out with like kind of debugging. So if we can ask for more help, like helping us make Ionic awesome is great. So like, if you want to be a first-time contributor, please, feel free to hit us up on Slack of like what you can do. We want to make it easy. I will say it's very challenging. We've closed over 4,000 issues in the history of Ionic. We get many a day, so it is very time-consuming. But we want to be able to help you out. But please don't get upset with us if we don't respond quickly. But we're trying our best. It's just kind of a numbers game.
On that note, I forgot to mention earlier, but Patrick and I have been talking that we are going to get Ionic 2 working with server rendering. That's like on our list, so we'll be talking soon about that. Brandy.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add, we released beta 3 of Ionic yesterday, actually, and with that came the Windows Phone support. And if you want to add the Windows support to your app, we've actually added some steps for it in the change log.
Cool, thanks, Brandy. Mike.
Yeah, so with all the new bits of Ionic 2 coming out and things kind of actively changing as time goes on, I just want to plug the Ionic Slack channel and the Ionic forum. You'll basically, if you don't hear an answer from me within like an hour or a day, something's wrong with me. So, I'm in there all the time. Ask your questions, and I help out as much as I can.
Great, thanks a lot, Mike. Thanks to the Ionic team for joining us. It's been an awesome show. Really appreciate it. Join us next week to hear Mark Lauble talk about React Native and Angular 2. And make sure you follow us on Twitter and Google+. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good one.
Thanks for having us, Jeff. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.